Everyone thought they knew Austin and Kayla. On stage, he lifted hands that made thousands weep. She stood by him, her smile glowing like morning light. To the world, they were perfect. But behind closed doors, love was a battlefield of fear, betrayal, and secrets that could not stay buried forever. The spotlight found Austin like it always did, as if heaven itself had aimed the beam. His voice rose above the sea of raised hands, 10,000 hearts beating in rhythm with his worship. But tonight, someone new caught his eye. She stood in the third row, tears streaming down her face, hands lifted high despite the trembling in her shoulders. Kayla Abraham had never felt God so close, yet so far away. The music wrapped around her broken heart like a gentle embrace, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. At 25, she carries scars that most people twice her age couldn't imagine. Abandoned at 7, bounced between foster homes, she had learned that love always came with conditions, and conditions always came with disappointment. After the service, Austin found his way to her. His smile was genuine, not the practiced grin he gave to donors and board members. "I'm Austin," he said simply, "and something tells me God has a story for you." Kayla looked up into eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. "I'm still waiting to hear what that story is," she whispered. What neither of them knew was that their story will become a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the price of perfection. The congregation would watch them rise together, never suspecting that behind their radiant smiles lay secrets that would shake the very foundation of faith itself. 6 months later, their first date was a prayer walk through the city. Austin showed her places where he'd seen God move, where miracles had happened in ordinary spaces. Kayla shared fragments of her past, carefully chosen pieces that wouldn't scare him away. She didn't tell him about the nightmares, the panic attacks, or the voice in her head that whispered she wasn't worthy of love. "God doesn't waste pain," Austin said as they sat on a park bench, the city lights twinkling like stars. "Your story isn't finished yet." Kayla wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone like Austin, someone who seemed to have a direct line to heaven, could love someone like her. But deep inside, the little girl who had been left behind was already preparing for the day he would walk away too. 2 years later, their wedding was the event of the season. 500 guests filled First Grace Community Church, and the live stream crashed twice from overwhelming traffic. Kayla walked down the aisle in her grandmother's restored dress, looking every inch the radiant bride. Austin waited at the altar, tears in his eyes, believing with all his heart that God had given him the perfect partner for ministry. The honeymoon in Santorini was picture perfect. Kayla posted carefully curated photos that showed only joy, hiding the moments when Austin would find her staring out at the endless blue ocean, lost in thoughts she couldn't share. "What are you thinking about?" he'd ask, and she'd smile and say, "Just grateful." Because how could she explain that she was already afraid of losing what they just found? Back home, they became the couple everyone wanted to be. Austin's ministry exploded. 3 services every Sunday, a conference ministry that took them across the country, a book deal that made him a household name in Christian circles. Kayla started a women's ministry, speaking about overcoming trauma and finding worth in God's love. On stage, her testimony was powerful. At home, she was fighting a war no one could see. The paranoia started small. A delayed text message, a female assistant who laughed too loudly at Austin's jokes, a conference call that ran late. Each incident was innocent, but in Kayla's mind, they became evidence of what she'd always known would happen. He would leave, just like everyone else. "Where were you?" she'd ask when he came home 20 minutes late from the grocery store. "Getting gas, I guess." "Honey, what's wrong?"
But Kayla couldn't explain that wrong was her default setting, that she'd been broken so early and so completely that love felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the inevitable fall. She started testing him. Small things at first. Would he remember their anniversary dinner when she didn't remind him? Would he choose ministry over her when she needed him most? Each test he passed should have made her feel better, but instead it only raised the stakes for the next one. The congregation loved them more with each passing month. They were invited to speak at megachurch conferences. Their marriage held up as an example of God's design for love. Young couples sought them out for counseling, never knowing that behind their radiant smiles, both Austin and Kayla were drowning in their own private storms.
The first major fight happened on a Tuesday night in March. Austin had stayed late at church for an impromptu counseling session with a young married couple. When he finally made it home at 10:47 p.m., Kayla was waiting in the dark. Who was she? The words cut through the silence like broken glass. What are you talking about? Austin dropped his keys on the counter, exhaustion heavy in his voice. The woman you were with. Don't lie to me, Austin. I can always tell when you're lying. But the terrible truth was, Austin wasn't lying. There had been a couple, John and Maria Santos, struggling with trust issues in their own marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him as he tried to explain to his wife that he'd been counseling someone else about the very thing that was destroying their relationship. Kayla didn't believe him. She'd called the church office 6 times. She'd driven by and seen 2 cars in the parking lot. She had convinced herself that this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the proof that she wasn't worth staying for. I can't do this anymore, Austin said, and for one terrifying moment, Kayla thought he meant their marriage. I can't live under a microscope. I can't have my every move questioned. I love you, but I'm drowning here. The fight lasted until 3 a.m. Neighbors would later say they heard voices, but no breaking glass, no slamming doors. Just the sound of 2 people trying to love each other across a canyon of pain that seemed too wide to bridge. Sleep became a luxury neither of them could afford. Austin would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how loving someone so much could feel so much like failing. Kayla would curl up on her side, listening to his breathing, fighting the urge to wake him up and ask him to promise again that he would never leave. The ministry continued to thrive, but the cost was becoming impossible to ignore. Austin lost 15 pounds in 2 months. Dark circles under his eyes became a permanent fixture that makeup couldn't hide. During worship, he could feel Kayla's eyes on him from the front row, watching, analyzing, looking for signs of betrayal that existed only in her wounded imagination. "You need help," Austin finally said one morning over coffee. "We need help." "There's nothing wrong with me," Kayla shot back. "I just know what men are capable of. I know how this story ends." But Austin was beginning to realize that if something didn't change soon, she might be right. Friends started to notice. Board members asked careful questions. The pastoral staff exchanged worried glances when Austin snapped over minor scheduling conflicts. The perfect couple was starting to crack, and everyone could see it except the people who mattered most. Late one night, as Kayla finally fell into an exhausted sleep beside him, Austin stared at her face in the moonlight. She looked so peaceful when she wasn't fighting invisible enemies. He loved her, God knew he loved her, but loving her was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much he poured in, it was never enough to make her feel secure. That was the night Austin first understood how a good man could make a terrible choice. It started innocently enough. Abigail William was the new music director at Riverside Community, the church where Austin was guest speaking for their annual conference. She was talented, professional, and married to a surgeon who worked 18-hour days. Like Austin, she was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. After the Friday night service, the leadership team went to dinner. Abigail sat across from Austin, and for the first time in months, he found himself in conversation with someone who didn't analyze his every word for hidden meanings. She laughed at his jokes without wondering if they contained coded messages. She asked about his ministry without interrogating him about his schedule. "Your wife is beautiful," Abigail said as they walked to their cars. "You're blessed." "I am," Austin replied automatically, but the words felt hollow. When had blessed started feeling like trapped? The second night of the conference, Austin's phone buzzed with a text from Kayla. "Who was that woman standing next to you during worship? I could see her on the live stream. She was looking at you." Austin stared at the message, something cold settling in his chest. Even when he was 300 miles away, leading thousands of people in worship, Kayla was watching, searching for evidence of betrayal. After the Saturday service, Abigail found him in the empty sanctuary. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You seem heavy." And somehow Austin found himself talking about the sleepless nights and the constant accusations, about feeling like he was slowly disappearing under the weight of someone else's fears, about loving someone so much that it was killing him by inches. Abigail listened without judgment, without advice, without making it about her own pain. It was the first time in 2 years that Austin had felt heard instead of cross-examined. "I should go," he finally said, looking at his watch. It was past midnight. "Me too," Abigail replied, but neither of them moved. The kiss was soft and desperate and wrong, and everything Austin hadn't realized he was starving for. It lasted 3 seconds and changed everything. "I can't do this," Austin pulled away, his heart hammering. "I know," Abigail whispered. "Neither can I." But 6 weeks later, when Abigail's husband left for a medical conference in Geneva and Kayla was visiting her sister in Denver, Austin found himself driving to Riverside, and then again the next month. And then it stopped being about conferences and started being about hotel rooms and lies, and the kind of betrayal that Austin had once been certain he was incapable of. For 2 years, Austin lived in 2 worlds. At home, he fought with Kayla about imaginary affairs while conducting a real one. At church, he preached about integrity while his own was crumbling. In Abigail's arms, he felt like himself again. Not perfect, not pure, but human and wanted and free from the suffocating weight of someone else's trauma. The guilt was a living thing, growing stronger with each sermon about faithfulness, each marriage conference where he and Kayla stood on stage pretending to have answers they didn't possess. But the alternative, losing the one person who made him feel alive, seemed impossible to face. Until the day Kayla found the credit card statement Austin had forgotten to intercept. The credit card statement fell from Kayla's trembling hands like autumn leaves. Hotel charges, restaurant bills. 2 years' worth of carefully hidden transactions that spelled out the story Austin had never found the words to tell. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't call him or drive to the church or do any of the things that her trauma-addled brain had always told her she would do in this moment. Instead, Kayla sat on their kitchen floor and felt something inside her break so completely that the sound of it seemed to echo through the house. When Austin came home at 6:23 p.m., he found her sitting at the kitchen table with the statement spread out like evidence in a courtroom. Her face was calm, but her eyes were empty in a way that terrified him more than any storm of anger could have. "Kayla, don't." Her voice was quiet, steady. "Don't say my name. Don't explain. Don't lie anymore." Austin sat down across from her, and for the first time in their relationship, he had nothing to say. The silence stretched between them like a canyon, filled with all the words they should have said, all the help they should have sought, all the choices that had led them to this moment of complete devastation. "How long?" 2 years. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air like a blade.
Austin looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw not the paranoid, suspicious woman he'd been fighting, but the broken little girl who had always known this day would come. "I love you," he said. And it was true. It was the most true thing he'd said in 2 years. "But you love her too." "Yes." Another nod, another piece of Kayla's heart falling into place in a pattern she'd learned long before she'd ever heard Austin's name. "I'm leaving," she said simply. "Kayla, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end it. I'll do whatever." "I'm not leaving because you cheated, Austin." Her voice was still that eerie calm, like the eye of a hurricane. "I'm leaving because I was right. I was right about everything, and I hate what that's done to both of us." She stood up from the table, and Austin realized she'd already packed. Her suitcases were sitting by the front door like she'd been preparing for this moment their entire marriage. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere I can remember who I was before I met you. Somewhere I can become who I'm supposed to be." Austin watched her walk toward the door, carrying only what she'd brought into their marriage. "I'm sorry," he called after her. Kayla paused with her hand on the doorknob. When she turned back, there were tears on her face, but her voice was strong. "I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 2 years of betrayal, Austin. Sorry doesn't heal the part of me that will always wonder if I drove you to this by being too broken to love properly. You didn't. Maybe I did. Maybe we both did. Maybe this was always how it was going to end." She opened the door, and the evening air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and new possibilities. "Goodbye, Austin." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Austin alone in the house they'd filled with dreams that had slowly turned into nightmares. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the credit card statement and wondering how love could feel so much like dying. Dr. Maria Santos had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that never rushed Kayla toward forgiveness she wasn't ready to give. The therapist's office became a sanctuary where Kayla could finally speak the truth about the war that had been raging inside her heart since childhood. "You've been carrying the weight of everyone else's choices," Dr. Santos said during their third session. "Your parents' abandonment, Austin's betrayal. But those choices weren't about your worth. They were about their capacity." Kayla lived in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a pediatric clinic where the children's laughter reminded her what innocent joy looked like. She'd wake up each morning and choose to believe that she deserved better, choose to trust that healing was possible, choose to see herself through God's eyes rather than through the lens of everyone who had walked away. The first few months were brutal. Kayla would catch herself reaching for her phone to check up on Austin, would drive by their old house just to see if his car was there, would scan social media for signs of how he was handling the aftermath of their marriage's explosion. But slowly, she began to realize that his healing wasn't her responsibility, her own was. She started attending a small community church where nobody knew her story. Pastor Jennifer Williams was a widow who'd rebuilt her life from scratch after losing her husband to cancer. She didn't push Kayla to forgive or to return or to be anything other than exactly where she was in her journey. God doesn't love the healed version of you more than the broken version, Pastor Jennifer said one Sunday. He's not waiting for you to get your act together. He's in the mess with you. Meanwhile, Austin's world was imploding in slow motion. The affair ended the day Kayla left. Abigail had made it clear that she couldn't continue being the other woman in a marriage that had finally shattered. The ministry continued, but Austin felt like a fraud every time he stepped on stage. Board meetings became exercises in carefully worded questions about his recent struggles and time of testing. But Austin had a secret that not even his closest advisors knew. He was sick. The exhaustion he'd attributed to marital stress and sleepless nights had a name, a rare autoimmune disease that was slowly attacking his nervous system. The diagnosis came 6 months after Kayla left, and Austin found himself facing mortality with no one to share the weight of it. He started writing letters to Kayla, long, rambling apologies that he never sent. He would sit in their empty house, surrounded by memories of what they'd built and destroyed, and wonder if loving someone meant knowing when to let them go. 2 years into their separation, Kayla had become someone she'd never imagined she could be. She laughed easily now, trusted cautiously but genuinely, and had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. She'd gone back to school to become a nurse, drawn to the idea of caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. "I want to be the person I needed when I was breaking," she told Dr. Santos during what would be their final regular session. "You already are," the therapist replied. "You've been healing all along." Austin's illness progressed slowly but relentlessly. The man who had once commanded stages and filled stadiums now struggled to get through a simple Sunday service. He'd finally stepped down from leadership, admitting to the congregation that he needed time to restore his soul, never mentioning that his body was betraying him too. Neither of them knew that their paths were about to cross again in a way that would test everything they'd learned about forgiveness, love, and letting go.
The call came on a Thursday morning in October, 5 years after Kayla had walked out of Austin's life. She was reviewing patient files at Mercy General's hospice wing when her supervisor, Patricia, knocked on her office door. "Kayla, we have a special assignment for you, a VIP patient who specifically requested our most compassionate nurse." VIP patients weren't unusual: politicians, business leaders, occasionally a minor celebrity who wanted privacy in their final days. Kayla gathered her materials and headed to room 314, reading the file as she walked. Austin Michael William. The name didn't register immediately. She knocked softly and pushed open the door, her eyes focused on the medical chart. "Mr. William, I'm Kayla Abraham, and I'll be your primary care nurse for..." The words died in her throat. Austin lay in the hospital bed, 40 pounds lighter than she remembered, his once commanding presence reduced to fragile humanity wrapped in pale blue hospital blankets. His eyes, those same eyes that had seen her across a crowded sanctuary 9 years ago, met hers with a mixture of shock, shame, and something that looked dangerously like relief. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The machines beeped steadily. The afternoon sun slanted through the window blinds. The world continued spinning while two people stared across the ruins of everything they'd once been. "Hello, Kayla." Austin's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Austin." Her own voice surprised her with its steadiness. Patricia appeared in the doorway behind her. "Oh, good. You two have already met. Mr. William asked for you specifically after seeing your name on our staff roster. Small world, right?" Kayla turned to look at her supervisor, her professional mask sliding perfectly into place. "Could I have a moment to review Mr. Williams' care plan privately?" "Of course. I'll be at the nurse's station if you need anything." The door closed with a soft click, leaving them alone with 5 years of unspoken words and a silence heavy with history. "You became a nurse," Austin said finally. "I did. And you're dying." The bluntness of it should have been cruel, but somehow it felt like the most honest words they'd spoken to each other since that last night in their kitchen. "Apparently so." Austin managed a weak smile. "Though I have to say, this wasn't how I imagined seeing you again." "How did you imagine it?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of her face. She looked different, yes, but more than that. There was a peace in her features that hadn't been there before, a settledness that spoke of battles fought and won. I didn't, actually. I thought you were done with me forever. I thought that was probably for the best. Kayla stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where normal people were living normal lives, unaware that two broken people were trying to figure out how to exist in the same room without destroying each other again. Your file says you have maybe 3 weeks. That's what they tell me. She turned back to face him. And you asked for me specifically. I did. Why? Austin closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked so much like the man she had fallen in love with that her breath caught. When he opened them again, there were tears. Because you were the best person I knew, and I wanted to remember what goodness looked like before I died. The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were manipulative or designed to win her back, but because they were simply devastatingly true. I'm not the same person that left you, Austin. I know. Neither am I. He paused, studying her face. Will you stay? As my nurse, I mean. I know it's asking too much, but I'll stay. The words surprised them both. But we need to be clear about something. I'm here as your nurse, not your wife, not your friend. I'm here to help you die with dignity, nothing more. Austin nodded, relief washing over his features. I understand. What neither of them understood was how much 3 weeks could change everything they thought they knew about love, forgiveness, and the strange mercy of second chances that come disguised as endings. The first week was clinical. Kayla administered medications with professional efficiency, monitored vital signs with detached competence, and spoke to Austin only about pain levels and comfort measures. She was determined to prove, to herself as much as to him, that she could do this job without reopening old wounds. But Austin made it difficult simply by being grateful. "Thank you," he said every time she adjusted his pillows. "Thank you," when she brought him water. "Thank you," when she helped him to the bathroom with the quiet dignity that made her such an exceptional nurse. On Friday of that first week, she found him trying to read his Bible with hands that shook too badly to hold it steady. "Would you like me to prop it up for you?" she asked. "I can't really focus on the words anymore," he admitted. "The medications make everything blurry." Kayla hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the well-worn book. "What were you trying to read?" "Psalm 23. I figured if I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I should probably get familiar with the map." Despite herself, Kayla almost smiled. Austin had always been able to find humor in the darkest moments. She opened to the psalm and began to read, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." As her voice filled the quiet room, Austin closed his eyes and listened to words of comfort spoken by the person who had every right to wish him suffering instead of peace. The next day, he asked her to read Psalm 51. The day after that, the story of the prodigal son. Slowly, without either of them planning it, their clinical relationship began to include moments of grace that neither could have anticipated. "Why did you really ask for me?" Kayla said one evening as she was preparing to leave for the day. Austin was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, "Do you remember what I said to you that first night we met? That God doesn't waste pain?" "I remember." "I think I finally understand what that means. Not that pain is good, but that it can be used for something good if we let it. You being here, taking care of me after everything I did, it feels like redemption I don't deserve." Redemption isn't about deserving, Austin. It's about grace. The words surprised them both. Somewhere in the space between medical procedures and whispered prayers, something has shifted.
Kayla wasn't here to punish him or to prove her strength. She was here because this was where love looked like when it had been refined by fire and loss and the long journey toward forgiveness. One evening, as rain drummed against the hospital window, Austin asked the question that had haunted him for 5 years. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" Kayla was adjusting his IV line, her movements precise and gentle. "I already have." "When?" "About 3 years ago. Not for you, but for me. I learned that forgiveness isn't saying what you did was okay. It's saying, I won't let what you did define who I become." Austin's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Kayla. Not just for the affair, but for everything. For making you feel like you weren't enough. For not fighting harder for us. For being too weak to..." "Austin." Her voice was soft but firm. "I need you to hear this. What happened to us wasn't all your fault. I brought my own brokenness into our marriage. I made it impossible for you to succeed, and then I blamed you for failing. You were trying to protect yourself." "I was. But protection became prison, and I locked us both inside it. We both made choices. We both hurt each other. We both lost something beautiful. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we gotten help sooner?" "Every day. But wondering doesn't change anything. This is where we are now." The rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass, as two people who had loved each other badly finally learned how to love each other well, not as husband and wife, but as two broken souls witnessing each other's humanity in the shadow of eternity.
Austin's final week arrived with autumn colors outside his window and an unexpected peace inside his heart. The pain medication kept him comfortable, but more than that, he was comfortable in ways he hadn't been in years. There were no more secrets to keep, no more pretending to be someone he wasn't, no more weight of guilt that had nearly crushed him. Kayla had taken leave to provide round-the-clock care. It wasn't hospital policy, but Patricia had made an exception after seeing how much Austin's condition had stabilized under Kayla's watchful care. "I need to tell you something," Austin said on Monday morning as Kayla helped him sip water through a straw, "about Abigail." "Austin, you don't need to. I do. I need to say this while I still can." He paused, gathering strength. "It was never about her being better than you. It was about her not knowing me well enough to be disappointed in who I really was." Kayla set down the water cup and really looked at him. "Who you really were? A man who could never live up to the pedestal everyone put him on. A husband who didn't know how to love someone who'd been as hurt as you were. A leader who was better at preaching grace than living it. You were human, Austin. That's not a crime." "No, but I thought it was. I thought if anyone saw the real me, especially you, they'd leave. So I tried to be perfect, and when that became impossible, I tried to escape." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Pastor Jennifer Williams entered, carrying a small bouquet of flowers from Kayla's church. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," she said. "Kayla mentioned you might appreciate a visit." Austin looked from Kayla to the pastor and back again, understanding something profound. "You told her about us." "I told her about me, about what I've learned about forgiveness and healing, about how sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone die in peace." Pastor Jennifer pulled up a chair. "Would you like me to pray with you, Austin?" For the next hour, the three of them talked about grace and mercy and the mystery of how God can work through broken people and broken marriages and broken dreams. Austin wept, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time in decades, he felt truly known and still accepted. On Wednesday, Austin asked Kayla to read him the story of the thief on the cross. "Today you will be with me in paradise," she finished. "Do you think it's really that simple?" Austin asked. "I think it's exactly that simple and exactly that complicated." Thursday, Austin could barely stay awake. Friday, he didn't speak at all. But every time he opened his eyes, Kayla was there reading scripture or humming hymns or simply holding his hand. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Austin opened his eyes one last time and looked at Kayla with perfect clarity. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying, for forgiving me, for letting me go." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for teaching me what love looks like when it's brave enough to let someone heal." Kayla opened the Bible to Psalm 23 and began to read. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Austin closed his eyes and smiled. At 11:47 a.m., with the voice of the woman he had loved and lost and found again, filling the quiet room with promises of eternal peace, Austin Michael Williams slipped away from this world and into the arms of the God who had never stopped loving him. Kayla sat with him for another hour, still holding his hand, still reading scripture, still believing in the kind of love that survives betrayal and transcends death. The funeral was held at First Grace Community Church, the same sanctuary where Austin and Kayla had exchanged vows 9 years earlier. 3,000 people filled the pews, former congregation members, ministry colleagues, and dozens of people whose lives had been changed by Austin's music and message. Kayla sat in the front row, not as the grieving widow, but as the woman who had helped a broken man find peace in his final days. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had walked through fire and emerged refined, not consumed. Pastor Williams gave the eulogy, speaking honestly about Austin's gifts and his failures, his impact and his humanity. Austin would want me to tell you that he was not a perfect man, she said, but he was a loved man, and in the end, that made all the difference. When it came time for the final song, Kayla surprised everyone by walking to the microphone. Her voice was clear and strong as she sang Amazing Grace, the same song Austin had been humming when she first saw him years ago. After the service, people approached Kayla with their condolences and their stories. A young pastor from Oregon who had been mentored by Austin, a woman from Texas whose marriage had been saved by one of Austin's sermons, a teenager whose father had left, just like Kayla's had, who found hope in Austin's honest preaching about broken families and faithful fathers. "He never stopped talking about you," an elderly woman said, taking Kayla's hand. "Even after you separated, he would tell people that you were the strongest person he knew." 6 months later, Kayla published a book, Healing Waters, a journey through trauma, love, and forgiveness. It became a bestseller, not because it offered easy answers, but because it told the truth about how hard love could be and how possible healing always was. She spoke at conferences and churches, sharing her story with other women who had been abandoned, betrayed, or broken by the people they trusted most. Her message was simple. Your trauma doesn't have to define your story, and your story doesn't have to end with your pain. I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life. Sometimes it's about letting them go in peace. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say goodbye well. Kayla never remarried, but she was not alone. She built a life filled with purpose, surrounded by a chosen family of fellow survivors and healers. She continued working in hospice care, specializing in helping families navigate the complicated emotions that arise when death comes to complicated relationships. On the 5th anniversary of Austin's death, Kayla visited his grave for the first and only time. She brought a single white rose and a letter she'd written, but never intended to send. Dear Austin, I want you to know that I'm okay. More than okay. I'm thriving. I want you to know that I don't think about you with anger anymore, or even with sadness. I think about you with gratitude. You taught me that love isn't about finding someone who will never hurt you. It's about finding someone worth forgiving when they do. We couldn't be that for each other in marriage, but somehow we figured out how to be that for each other in goodbye. I hope you're at peace. I hope you're singing again. And I hope that somehow, wherever you are, you know that your story didn't end with your mistakes. It ended with grace. She placed the rose on his headstone and walked away, not looking back. There was too much life ahead of her to spend time mourning what was behind. That evening, Kayla sat on her porch with a cup of tea and her journal, writing the final chapter of a book that would help thousands of people understand that sometimes the most beautiful endings come disguised as the most devastating beginnings. Above her, the stars shone with the same light that had guided her through the darkest nights of her life. Tomorrow would bring new patience, new stories, new opportunities to witness the mysterious alchemy by which God transforms pain into purpose and wounds into wisdom. Kayla smiled and kept writing. Her story was far from over.